I was only 25 when my family sold me. Even saying it aloud feels like a knife sliding across the fragile thread of my life. The words are too simple for the weight they carry. Sold. As if I were an object, a thing to be measured, priced, and traded. People always ask, why? How could they do that? As if money alone can explain the betrayal, as if fear, desperation, and helplessness could ever fit neatly into numbers on a ledger. But the truth is far heavier, and it began long before that night, in a house where every whisper and cough had a cost, where smiles were measured against the shadow of debt, and love was always counted in rupees and responsibilities. I remember the moment the decision was made as if it were happening again. The quiet, careful words, the polite explanation that it was for the family, the polite way they offered me to someone else, as though I were a problem to solve rather than a person to protect. That night, the world shifted beneath me. I felt my own body become unfamiliar, like it belonged to someone else, and the people who were supposed to love me the most became strangers. I grew up in a house that was full of life, but weighed down by worry. At first glance, we seemed ordinary: a father who worked odd jobs to keep the lights on, a mother whose laughter filled the kitchen when she wasn't worrying about the next month's bills, and 3 children who ran through the small courtyard chasing dreams bigger than our means. We prayed together, argued like any family, celebrated birthdays with small cakes and big hearts. On the outside, we looked happy. But behind the walls, every sound, every movement, was measured against necessity. My father's cough became a debt he could not afford to ignore. My mother's silence carried the unspoken calculations of what we could and could not survive. When my youngest brother fell ill that one winter, I watched my parents scramble, borrowing from neighbors, selling small trinkets, anything to save him. The strain was constant, like a heavy cloth pressed across our chests. I started working early, stitching dresses and mending clothes in a tiny corner of our home, hoping the money I earned would make a difference. It did sometimes, but often it felt like pouring water into a bucket with a hole. Despite the hardships, I thought our family's love would protect us. We leaned on each other for comfort, whispered jokes at night, shared dreams we could barely afford to imagine. I believed my work, my small contributions, my loyalty to them, was enough. I thought we were weathering the storm together, that the bond of blood could withstand even desperation. But desperation has a way of changing the rules. It whispers that survival is more important than love, more important than trust. It makes people see solutions that would have been unthinkable in calm times as the only choice. By the time I was 25, the pressure had built into an almost unbearable weight. The debts, the illnesses, the landlord's warnings, all of it stacked on top of each other like bricks in a wall that kept growing taller, leaving me feeling trapped and helpless. Every night I lay awake listening to the creaking of the old roof, wondering how we had gotten here, and hoping, desperately, that some miracle would come before the pressure became unbearable. It's easy to say family first, but when survival looms, the line between love and duty blurs. That is the backdrop of my story, a house filled with love and laughter, shadowed by fear and need, where every choice was weighed not only by morality, but by necessity. It is here, in this quiet, constant pressure, that the decisions that would change my life forever began to form. I didn't know it then, but the day I was sold was not born in a moment. It was a slow, creeping inevitability, shaped by every cough, every unpaid bill, every whispered worry in the dark. It did not happen with a loud argument or a sudden outburst. There was no dramatic shouting, no slammed doors, no tears falling in the kitchen where we once laughed together. It happened in a quiet room at the back of the house, where the sunlight barely reached, where the air felt heavier than usual. I had been called there by my father, his face pale, his hands trembling, not with age, but with the weight of something he could not say aloud. My mother sat across from him, her expression carefully neutral, her fingers twisting a handkerchief in her lap. I could feel that something was wrong before I even heard the words. "There is a man," my father began, his voice low, careful, as if he were trying to soften the edges of the knife he was holding. He can take care of you. He can take care of all of us. I blinked at him, trying to understand, trying to find some gap in the words that would make this a mistake, a joke, anything other than what I feared. What do you mean? My voice shook despite my attempt to sound steady. He avoided my gaze. He will help the family. He will take responsibility for you. It is for the good of everyone. I remember the way my heart thudded violently against my chest, as if trying to escape the words. They did not call it selling. They used softer words, phrases like marriage arrangement or chance, as though arranging a person like furniture could ever be anything other than betrayal. My mind spun, trying to hold on to the tiny truths I had always believed in. My family loved me, my family protected me. And yet, here they were, offering me away as if I were a problem to solve, a debt to be paid, a burden to be removed. I said no, at first quietly, almost in disbelief, thinking if I whispered it, the world might right itself. Then louder, more desperate, as reality pressed closer, suffocating me. No. I can't. I won't. I screamed, my voice breaking. But my words fell flat against the cold logic of necessity. My parents did not argue. They did not try to persuade me with emotion or reason. They only told me it was for the family, for survival, for the children. I saw the way my mother's lips pressed together, the way my father's shoulders slumped, and I understood. They had already decided, and nothing I said could change it. I felt a wave of panic rise, a mixture of fear, disbelief, and heartbreak. I tried to imagine escape, a way to run from the betrayal that had grown so quietly over months and years. But the house, my family, even the streets I had walked since childhood, all seemed to shrink around me. I was trapped not only by walls, but by the knowledge that my refusal might not matter. By the end of that conversation, I was shaking, my hands pressed against my knees, my chest aching. They did not raise their voices. They did not need to. The quiet finality of their words, the calmness with which they spoke my fate, cut deeper than any scream ever could. That day, the foundation of my life shifted. The people I had trusted the most had chosen survival over me, and I realized, in that suffocating silence, that nothing would ever feel the same again. The betrayal didn't arrive with fanfare. It arrived quietly, like a shadow that had been there all along but only revealed itself when the light shifted. After the conversation that broke me, everything in the house seemed to change without a sound. My parents' smiles became tighter, their words measured, and every glance from them carried a weight I had never felt before. The warmth of our home, the laughter at night, the comfort of shared meals, even the familiar creak of the old wooden floor, became foreign. I felt like a stranger in the house I had grown up in. It was that night when I realized the depth of their betrayal. They called a man, polite, careful, and distant, to speak to them about the arrangement. I sat in the corner of my room, listening to their voices through the thin walls, trying to pretend I was sewing, pretending the needle and thread could stitch together the pieces of my shattered heart. But I knew. I understood. I had become a transaction, a solution to their problems, and no amount of tears or pleas could undo it. Packing my few belongings felt surreal. I hid my scissors, my journal, the few dresses I had worked so hard on. I left a note under my pillow. Forgive me, because I didn't know if I could forgive them, and yet I wanted them to understand that I had not abandoned them. They had abandoned me. The day I left was quiet. There was no crowd, no dramatic scene. A simple handshake, polite words, a van waiting outside. I felt the world tilt beneath me. As the vehicle drove away, I caught a glimpse of my family through the window, my father's stooped shoulders, my mother's eyes carefully averted, my younger siblings pressed against the doorway. I wanted to run back, to hold them, to plead with them to remember me as their daughter, not a burden. But I didn't. I couldn't. The reality pressed too hard. I was being taken from everything I knew, and they did nothing to stop it. The betrayal was not only in the act itself, but in its quietness. There was no anger, No apology, no acknowledgement of the human being who had loved them, who had stitched clothes to feed them, who had sacrificed for the family. There was only practicality, the cold, calculating logic of survival, and the crushing realization that the people who were supposed to protect me had chosen convenience over love. Even now, I can close my eyes and feel that moment, the betrayal sinking into my bones, as if every memory from my childhood was being pulled out and weighed against money. The warmth I once associated with home became a haunting echo. The people who were supposed to be my world had traded me for relief, and in that trade, I became invisible to them. A ghost they could not see, only a price they could count. The first night in that stranger's house is a memory I will never forget. I lay on a thin mattress that smelled faintly of soap and dust, staring at the ceiling as if it could tell me why this had happened, as if it could give me answers I did not have. The room was quiet, except for the soft hum of the fan above me and the occasional creak of the old floorboards. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow seemed to move toward me, and I realized with a hollow ache that I was utterly alone. He was polite at first. He offered me tea, spoke in gentle tones, asked me questions about my life, as if that could somehow soften the reality I was living. I wanted to believe in his kindness, even for a moment, but every gesture carried the weight of a contract I hadn't wanted to sign. His politeness was not comfort. It was a reminder. I was no longer my own. I was a possession, carefully handled, accounted for, and controlled. I tried to sleep, but sleep would not come. My mind kept replaying the betrayal, my family's quiet acceptance, the polite handshake, the van that took me away from everything I had known. I thought of my home, the laughter of my siblings, the smell of my mother's cooking, the tiny courtyard where we had shared secrets and dreams. Those memories were both a comfort and a torment. I could almost hear my mother calling me to dinner, see my father working late to patch something broken, and yet, none of it was real anymore. By midnight, I could no longer lie still. I curled up, hugging my knees, and let the tears come. They were not just for the loss of home, but for the loss of choice, the loss of dignity, the loss of safety in the people who were supposed to protect me. I felt small, like a bird trapped in a cage, my wings clipped by the very hands that were supposed to guide me. In the dark, I made promises to myself I barely believed I could keep. That one day I would reclaim my voice, that one day I would sow again, that one day I would be more than what someone had decided I was worth. I whispered these promises into the night, hoping the walls would carry them, hoping some part of me could survive this first night, this first betrayal. And then I understood something that would haunt me for years. The worst part of being betrayed is not the act itself. It is the quiet, lingering presence of it, the way it settles into your bones, the way it follows you into the night and refuses to leave. That first night in that strange house stayed with me, not as a single moment, but as a shadow that stretched into every corner of my life. I realized then that survival was not just about escaping the house or the man. Survival was about carrying the weight of betrayal without letting it erase who I was. The aftermath of being sold was not dramatic. There were no dramatic confrontations or public shaming, only silence and a quiet life that tried to go on as if nothing had happened. My family received their money, smiled in the market as though their burdens had been lifted, and returned to life as usual. The children's books arrived in the mail. The roof was patched. The debts cleared. And yet, while my family's world had been patched together with bills paid, my own world was broken into fragments that no money could fix. Every day became a careful act of survival. I had to navigate a home where I was a guest, a stranger in someone else's house. The polite gestures, the forced kindness, the reminders that I was taken care of were constant, invisible chains. People spoke to me differently. Neighbors looked at me as if I were something delicate, fragile, and tainted, or worse, as if I belonged somewhere else, and my existence there was unnatural. I felt the eyes on me, the whispers I could not escape, the way society quietly stamped shame onto me without a word. Even the small things I had loved, Sewing, laughter, sharing stories with friends felt distant. My fingers, once nimble and proud, hesitated over a needle. My voice, which had once carried dreams and laughter, trembled with fear whenever I spoke. I realized that betrayal is not just the act itself, but the way it stretches its fingers into every corner of your life, leaving its mark long after the moment has passed. At night, I would lie awake, thinking of my family, my home, the life I had lost. I imagined my mother in the kitchen, stirring chai as she had always done, my father reading a newspaper while counting coins, my younger siblings laughing in the courtyard. And I would cry, not just for what I had lost, but for the knowledge that the people I loved most had chosen survival over me. The most excruciating part was knowing that my absence caused them no guilt, no sorrow that could be seen. They moved on, and I was left to carry the weight of a life I had not chosen. Yet, in that quiet aftermath, I also began to notice something else, a small, fragile sense of self that had not been touched. Even in despair, even in fear, even in humiliation, a part of me remained unbroken. I clung to it like a lifeline, whispering promises into the dark, that one day I would reclaim my voice, my life, and my dignity. I did not know how or when, but I held on to it. The aftermath was not a single event. It was every day lived with the shadow of betrayal. It was learning to navigate a world where trust had been fractured, where love had been conditional, and where survival for some had meant the cost of my freedom. It was a silent ache, a constant reminder that the most painful betrayals are the ones that leave no visible scar, only an invisible weight that presses down on every waking moment. It took months before I realized that my voice, though shaken, had not been completely silenced. The first time I sensed it was during a quiet afternoon when the rain had just stopped and the air smelled of wet earth and new beginnings. I was sitting by the window, hands idle, staring at the streets I used to walk freely, when an old friend appeared unexpectedly. She had known me before the betrayal, before the world had reshaped me into something fragile and afraid. She didn't flinch at the sight of my quiet despair. Instead, she reached out her hand, the gesture simple but filled with warmth, and asked me to talk. I told her everything: the conversation, the van, the nights of fear, the small humiliations I had endured. I told her about the shame that followed me like a shadow, the way my family had chosen survival over love, and the loneliness of being trapped in a polite, controlled home that was not mine. And for the first time in months, I felt heard, really heard. She did not judge, did not offer empty comfort. She simply listened, her presence a reminder that I was still human, still capable of hope and strength. Her belief in me, quiet and steadfast, became a spark. I started sewing again. Not for anyone else, not to prove my worth, not to earn approval. I stitched because my hands remembered who they were, because it was the one thing that connected me to my past self. I began with small items: baby caps for a local clinic, simple curtains for neighbors, little pieces that reminded me I could create, that I could still contribute to the world in my own way. Each stitch felt like a small reclaiming of myself, a declaration that I was more than a price paid or a life stolen. I also sought help, legal advice, guidance, and connections with women who had known similar pain. Slowly, carefully, I started to realize that survival was not just about enduring. It was about reclaiming control, about finding a voice that could say, "I am here. I exist. I am more than what you decided for me." The turning point was not sudden. It was quiet, built from small victories and gentle encouragement. It was the recognition that even in the darkest nights, a flicker of hope could exist, and that hope could grow if nurtured. That realization changed me. It gave me courage to speak up when I had been silent, to act when I had been paralyzed by fear, and to trust that my story, no matter how painful, deserved to be told. I was beginning to understand that finding my voice was not only about escaping the past. It was about reclaiming my present, one moment, one stitch, one word at a time. The confrontation with my family did not come from anger or revenge. It came from a quiet need to be seen, to be acknowledged as a human being rather than a decision, a debt, or a burden. Months after I had begun rebuilding my life, I found myself standing at the edge of the home I had once lived in, my hands trembling, my heart beating like it wanted to escape my chest. I did not go there to yell, to accuse, or to punish. I went there to ask a question I had carried for far too long. Did you think of my life? My parents looked at me with eyes that avoided mine. My mother's hands twisted nervously, my father's shoulders slumped under the weight of a choice that had cost more than they realized. They had expected that distance, that polite silence, that my absence would erase the pain they had caused. They had not counted on me returning with my own voice, my own strength, my own refusal to be invisible. I spoke calmly, steadily, each word chosen carefully because for the first time I felt I could hold my own. I told them how their decision had shattered my world, how it had left me afraid, humiliated, and alone. I told them about the nights I cried in silence, the moments when I feared I would never recover, and the slow process of stitching myself back together, piece by piece. There were no apologies. There were no excuses that could undo the past. But there was recognition, subtle, hesitant, but there nonetheless. I saw it in the way my father's mouth tightened, the way my mother blinked rapidly, as if understanding at last the cost of their choices. In that moment, I realized that confrontation was not always about punishment. Sometimes, it is about being witnessed, about showing that you are still whole even when you have been broken. Leaving that home, I felt lighter than I had in years. I did not need them to say sorry. I did not need them to change. My victory was quiet, but it was mine. I had reclaimed my dignity, my voice, and my presence. I had faced the people who had tried to erase me and proved that their decisions could not define my life. I had grown stronger, not because of anger or vengeance, but because I had refused to let betrayal have the final word. From that day forward, I carried a quiet strength with me, a reminder that even in the face of the deepest hurt, there is power in survival, in reclaiming your voice, and in moving forward with courage. The victory was not loud or celebrated. It did not make headlines or change anyone else's life. But it changed mine. I was no longer a shadow of someone else's choice. I was myself again. Even after I reclaimed my voice, the aftertaste of betrayal lingered like a shadow I could not shake. It was not just the memory of being sold or the humiliation of losing control over my own life. It was the quiet ache that followed me into every new place I went, the hesitancy in my steps, the way I flinched at unexpected touches or harsh words. Sometimes, even in a room full of kind people, I felt invisible, as if the world could not fully see me, could not fully understand what I had endured. Yet, slowly, I began to notice the small sparks of life returning. I reopened my tiny stall, stitching again, not for anyone else but for myself. Each piece I made carried a fragment of my past and a hope for the future. Baby caps for children at a local clinic, simple curtains for neighbors, little things that reminded me I could create, I could work, I could live. Every stitch became a declaration. I am here. I belong to myself. I also began to connect with others who had known similar pain. There were women who had endured betrayal, silence, and exploitation. They became my quiet community, offering strength, advice, and understanding in a world that often turned away. We shared stories, tears, and small victories. I realized then that healing was not a solo journey. It was about finding those who could hold space for your pain while you reclaimed your life. The past still visits me, the betrayal, the nights of fear, the people who should have protected me. But now I meet it with a sense of ownership. I am no longer simply a victim of circumstances. I am a survivor, a woman who endured the unimaginable and came out with her dignity intact. I have learned to hold my pain without letting it define me, to remember the lessons without letting them imprison me. The future feels fragile, but it is mine. I wake each morning and choose myself again, just as I did the first time I dared to stitch for myself, the first time I spoke my story aloud, the first time I refused to let betrayal have the final word. I plan cautiously but dream boldly, knowing that my life cannot be bought or sold, cannot be dictated by the fears of others. I have hope, not because the world is safe or fair, but because I have survived it, and that survival has given me strength. And so, I walk forward carrying both the weight and the wisdom of what I have lived through. I tell my story quietly, in the hope that it might reach someone else, someone trapped in their own shadow, someone who needs to know that survival is possible, that reclaiming your voice is possible, and that even the deepest betrayals do not have to define the rest of your life. The aftertaste of pain remains, yes, but so does the sweetness of having survived, and the knowledge that the future, finally, belongs to me. There are moments, even now, when I wake in the middle of the night and feel that same weight pressing against my chest. The memory of that night, the silence that followed, the realization that the people I trusted most had chosen money over me. But then, as I sit up and breathe, I remember where I am now. The air feels different.
Softer.
Freer. It reminds me that I'm no longer trapped in their choices. I'm living by my own. What I carry with me is not just the pain, though it still lingers in quiet corners of my heart. I carry the strength that pain gave me, the kind that grows only after you've been broken and forced to rebuild yourself from the pieces left behind. I carry the lessons written in scars, that silence can destroy, that love without respect is a lie, and that forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. I've learned that survival doesn't always look heroic. Sometimes it looks like waking up, cooking breakfast, and daring to smile even when the world feels heavy. Sometimes it looks like choosing to trust again, even if it terrifies you. I carry those small victories like invisible medals, each one proof that I refuse to disappear, that I refuse to let their betrayal erase me. I've also learned to forgive, not for them, but for me. Forgiveness, I realized, is not an act of approval. It's an act of release. It's how I stopped carrying their shame and started carrying my own peace. My parents' faces still visit me in memory, sometimes with guilt, sometimes with sadness. And though I no longer seek their apology, I hope that somewhere deep inside, they remember the daughter they once had, the one who found her way back from the darkness they placed her in. Every day, I walk forward with a quiet awareness. Life will never be the same, but it can still be beautiful. I no longer chase perfection or approval. I find beauty in simple things, the hum of my sewing machine, the laughter of children outside my window, the feel of sunlight on my skin after long nights. These are my reminders that I am alive, that I made it through, that I am more than what was done to me. If you asked me today what I carry with me, I would tell you this. I carry pain, but also strength. I carry scars, but also stories. I carry loss, but also life. And most of all, I carry myself, not the frightened girl who was sold, but the woman who rose from that betrayal, who learned that even in the ruins of her past, she could build something whole again. I was sold once, but now I am free. Don't miss out. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest stories. Like, comment, and share if this video